Welcome to the Smart Connected Group and the podcast. It's Thursday night. I have a fantastic guest for you tonight, as ever. Her name's Julie Barber. Welcome, Julie.
Hi, Jane. Thanks for having me.
Now, Julie is all about getting businesses ready to attract investment, aren't you, Julie? You're all about getting them investor ready, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So what we're going to talk about tonight is your business, Spark Consulting, and how you actually get businesses ready to attract the investment that they want. Because, I mean, this is such an important topic because businesses can't scale in some instances without investment. So a lot of business owners, they've got all that creative energy and they've got all that excitement and they've got a great idea and maybe they've got a business plan, but the thing that's missing is the money, right?
Absolutely,
Yeah. So just love to hear about, first of all, you and how you've come to this place and what your journey is so far. And secondly, let's just get into the nitty gritty. So first of all, tell us about yourself, Julie. How did you come to be CEO of Spark Consulting? What's your background and history?
Sure. So I come from 20 years in financial services. I did the full run between consultancy, regulators, banks, working with the likes of KPMG, HSBC, and the Financial Services Compensation Scheme. And through that time, I worked in strategic planning, in large-scale global transformations, and in innovation as well. And through the innovation work, I was increasingly exposed to startups who were coming in to pitch for corporate investment, for corporate sales, and getting increasingly frustrated at how often they shot themselves in the foot because they weren't actually ready to talk to those potential investors, and they were burning their golden opportunities. So when I set up Spark 3 years ago, I initially started just working with corporates on innovation type things and transformation. And then about 18 months ago, we also added onto our service portfolio and working with the startups on raising investment. Particularly because over that 20 years in financial services, I've pitched to corporate boards countless times and got sort of over 20 million in investment out of corporate boards. So I understand what it takes to convince someone to give you money, and applying those principles into startup world is very similar. So went from there really.
So Dragon's Den. I'm just thinking about Dragon's. I love watching Dragon's Den, and I was actually watching it last night with this pretty young guy, really, who he's only in his late 20s, and he's become the youngest dragon. So
Yes.
Is it a bit like Dragon's Den?
It can be. I mean, it depends who you raise investment from. So, if you raise investment from a single angel investor, then you probably just have a chat over a cup of coffee or have a meeting together. But if you raise from a venture capital fund, then you might have to present in front of their investment panel, or similarly, a syndicate might have the same kind of approach.
Right. So what I'd love to do, Julie, is just talk about venture capital, because, we do talk about raising finance quite a lot on the podcast, because obviously that's the route to scale. So I'm very interested in, talking about how businesses can help themselves actually get in that position where they are investor ready and they are able to facilitate and fund their growth. So let's just talk about venture capital and venture capitalists for a moment, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
Because, some of my audience, they won't have been exposed to that world. They won't really know what VCs actually do. It will all be a bit of a mystery. So if you wouldn't mind just kind of starting there and just explaining, what is venture capital? What are venture capitalists, and what sort of things do they do?
Sure. So venture capitalists are people who work for venture capital funds. So venture capital funds are set up to invest in early stage, high risk companies with the understanding that although the risks are high, if they get the balance of their portfolio right and enough of their portfolio do well, then the returns are also very high. So typically, you will get either high net worth individuals or institutions like pension funds, some banks investing into these VC funds. And then it's the job of the VC fund to then choose which companies they invest into. And most VCs have quite a prescribed investment thesis, i.e. a set of criteria for the types of companies that they invest in. So some will invest in right at the beginning, at very early stage when it's just an idea, and some will say we don't invest in anything that's got less than $1 million in annual recurring revenue. And they're also likely to be geographically focused and also sector focused. Mm-hmm. So if you're looking for venture capital, you have to find the venture capital funds that match your criteria of your business, match to their investment criteria. And then when eventually you sell your business, either you in a trade sale or it goes to IPO, then the VC fund basically get their initial investment back, and hopefully a good chunk on top of that, which goes back to their investors, and the VC fund also take their cut.
That's really, really helpful and very clear. So thank you so much, Julie, for explaining that. So presumably, when you say there are some VC funds that invest only in businesses that are profitable and they're already turning over at least £1 million in revenue, and then there are others who are willing to take on startups, perhaps with a kind of bright idea, and there's obviously risk is a big element in this, isn't there? Because there's a huge difference, isn't there, between a $1 million plus turnover business that has proof of concept and is already profitable, and a business that is just in its infancy and just a startup, really. So there is a difference in risk. Most of the ones that have got $1 million in annual recurring revenue are still not profitable. They've just got revenue of a decent level, but they're not hitting break even yet, probably at that point. But the risk is still very big for both scenarios, whether it's very early stage or they've got that $1 million in revenue. But it's a different shape risk. So the very early stage ones won't raise as much investment. They might raise 150k, 250k, maybe £1 million. So there isn't as much money to be lost, but there's a higher percentage risk that you might lose it. But with the £1 million revenue company, they'll probably be raising 15, 20 million pounds. So there's a lot more potential money to be lost, but slightly less chance that you'll lose it. So it's a balancing act at each end of the scale. But I guess in a way, look, I mean, there's risk in all investment, isn't there? But for example, I have a history in the property sector, and there are plenty of investors, for example, bridges, that they don't want to take any risk at all. I mean, they're like banks, so they're like, they want to have a first charge over a property, and they want to make sure that any investment that they make is backed by assets, which is the lowest risk investment that you can take. But when you actually move into business investment, as you said, VCs and so on, I mean, it is a high risk environment, and people have to have the money to play with, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are very strict rules about who can invest in startups. So if you're an individual who wants to invest in a startup, you either have to be able to self-certify as a high net worth individual, so having over a certain amount of personal wealth, or you have to be able to self-certify as what's called a sophisticated investor. So that's usually someone who's worked in financial services and is therefore thought to have enough knowledge about what the risks are around startups to be able to take that risk in a calculated way. Or you can invest through a crowdfunding platform, and there on a crowdfunding platform you don't have to necessarily certify that you are of that level, but then there are other limits and checks and things that are done to make sure that you understand exactly what you're getting into. But with a startup, never ever invest money you can't afford to lose, because there's a very high chance that you could lose it.
Yes, indeed. And, I know people over the years who have, they've been very, very successful in tech investing. But I think that there's a statistic there, isn't there, that something like 1 in 10 really take off and become what they call unicorns or sort of very successful businesses. But the 9 out of the 10, they just don't really go anywhere. So it's a bit like that, isn't it?
It is, and that's why most, all VC funds and most angel investors who are serious will build a portfolio of investments so that they can spread the risk across a number of different companies, and so that one of them will really go and the rest might, totter along, and a couple will fail, and that way they make sure that they get their investment back and make a return. But if you're only able to invest in 1 or 2 companies and you're pinning all your hopes on that, again, your risk level is much higher.
So do you find that investors are also attracted to your venture capital because it's fun?
Definitely. I mean, people, it's partly because it's fun. There's also often a level of philanthropy in terms of supporting new innovation, supporting new business. You often get entrepreneurs who've built a successful business themselves, sold it for a really good amount of money, then investing some of that money back into the startup ecosystem because they appreciate where they were and how hard they found it to get funding. So they then want to support people who are on their way up as well. So, but the variety of different ideas and innovations that come out, and being able to support the growth of those, particularly the ones that have significant social impact, definitely means that it's really exciting for people to be involved in, to say that they were a part of that.
Yeah. So do you think like having social impact, environmental impact, having some kind of social or environmental cause makes startups more attractive to investors?
Certainly in the last couple of years, that's really turning out to be true. There's an increasing demand for startups that have social impact as their pure purpose. So they remove plastic from oceans. They produce things in a sustainable way. But also there's now an underlying movement as well of looking at what's called their ESG, their environmental and social governance. So even if your company is about selling diamonds, then where did the diamonds come from? Are they ethically sourced, and there were no slavery type connotations around the sourcing of things? Or if you make an alcoholic drink, what kind of packaging is it in, and what's the carbon effect of creating your product? So that's starting to become much more of a concern for investors across the board.
Yeah, and I can understand that. In fact, I was talking about this with one of my clients the other day, that a lot of people, they have a social conscience, particularly if they've made some money, if they've been in a position where they are now materially advantaged. Let's just say, they want to feel as though they can leave a positive legacy for their children and for the planet as a whole, because that is important, isn't it, Julie? So is it partly to do with that, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, a lot of the, people who are contributing to crowdfunding campaigns these days, and those are becoming more and more popular because it's allowing the kind of democratizing of investment. The people that are investing in those are getting younger and younger. So millennials, Generation Z, all of whom have a very strong environmental conscience, are carrying that over into their investment behaviour.
Yeah, that's an interesting statement as well, Julie. I mean, do you think that millennials and Gen Z, do you think that they are more environmentally conscious, more socially conscious than baby boomers, for example, as a rule?
I think there's definitely more of an active movement in those generations, and statistically, they're also Gen Z especially are also the generation that drinks the least alcohol, that eats more healthily than their parents do, and it's the parents going out getting drunk and the kids going, for goodness sake, will you behave yourselves. So there's this whole kind of healthier and concern with mental health, all of those things. There's this whole concern with health and environment and all of those elements that are coming together in their personal lives, but they're carrying that over into their investment behaviours too.
That's really interesting because, I'm actually technically a baby boomer. So what's kind of interesting is that, I really remember the kind of, the greed is good, Gordon Gekko kind of, that time really, which was not a social time. It was very much about greed, that whole kind of Thatcher era. And, there are social movements, aren't there? I think that, I think we're in a very, very different age now, and I never really kind of bought into that, really, to be honest. Just that whole unbridled kind of just go for it, no matter what impact it has on other people.
Yeah.
But it was a social movement. Let's just say, a lot of people were very influenced by that.
Yes.
So yeah. So do you think that? Do you think that? Would you think that investors are perhaps older people generally, or would you say that you mentioned that there are millennials and Gen Zs and so on sort of coming through now that are actually changing the appetite of the marketplace? I mean, it is an interesting concept, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it really, again, it really depends on who you're getting your investment from. So staff at VCs, so venture partners and the people that assess decks as they come in are getting younger and younger. Within angel investing, there's a bit of a mix. So there is a bit of the kind of over 45 white male dominance within that body of people, but because you're getting now a real churn of young entrepreneurs who've built and sold a business very quickly within 5 or 6 years, so by the time they're 30 or 35 they're actually sitting on substantial money. Now they're coming back into the angel investing ecosystem and bringing their opinions with them, and then people who are even younger than that and who don't have as much money are investing through crowdfunding, where they can put in, £10, £100, £1,000. They don't have to put down, 50k or 100k. So, but they still, in their volume of numbers, make their presence felt.
And that's really nice because, it just, I think the thing about crowdfunding is that it does make investment accessible to all. And, there was this definitely this view, I think, which is, a view of old, maybe before these crowdfunding opportunities came along, that investment was only for a certain category of people. But in a way, it has democratized it, hasn't it? So people can learn about investment. They can start to get financially educated and actually start looking at risk profiles of different businesses and different types of investing, and it's a good opportunity, really, isn't it? Wouldn't you say?
It is. I think there can still be there is a risk with crowdfunding that it can create something of a sheep mentality, though, because when you go onto a crowdfunding platform and there's 50 companies raising, and you go and see, oh, hang on, that one's overfunded already, it must be amazing, I'll put my money in that one, or that one's already at 96%, and the one that's only at 57%, oh, is that really any good? And it's relying on other people's, the ones who've gone before, to say, oh yeah, it must be good because they've already put their money in. So there is a risk of that kind of, sheep behavior.
Yeah. And it can be manipulated as well. So I was actually, I suppose I am kind of allowed to say this. I have to be kind of a little bit careful, but let's just say that I supported, raising investment for a certain project on a property crowdfunding platform. And it was the fastest raise in history, because by the time the raise was opened, there was £1 million worth of investment already pledged. Now, there is a kind of PR thing, should we say, that kind of goes along with that. So being a marketer, obviously, I do kind of understand that this thing about scarcity is a very big thing when it comes to marketing. That people feel, oh my God, it's 75% funded on day one. And of course, it's a trigger, isn't it? And then people pile in. And yeah, it's just one of those things, isn't it? So what would you say if you were an investor? Is it just due diligence? Should you just be careful and not follow the crowd, or should you just go with the zeitgeist? So go with as an investor, just say, okay, this looks interesting. Enough people are interested in it. I'm just going to take a punt.
I think it comes down to your budget. So if what you can afford to punt or not punt. I would always recommend that people invest in sectors that they know. Yeah. So if you're already in health and wellbeing, you're probably better able to judge whether a health and wellbeing business is likely to be successful than whether you can judge if a new clinical advancement in cancer treatment is going to be successful. So stick to what you know. Do look at the pitch decks that they make available. Do look at the financial details. Do get in contact and ask them questions if you don't understand things, because the founders will always be monitoring all of the questions coming in and answering them. So even if you write them a list of like 20 questions, it's their job to answer those questions. So don't feel like you can only look at the things that are on the launch page. Get in contact and ask the hard questions.
So should the founders always be available for the investor questions? I mean, for example, on a crowdfunding platform, isn't it partly the crowdfunding platform's job to be able to answer those questions on behalf of the investors?
No. So the crowdfunding platform is the mechanism to give access to them, and they do a certain level of due diligence before you're allowed onto the platform. But then it is absolutely the founder's job to answer questions from any potential investors.
Yeah, so the founders need to be accessible.
Yeah, absolutely. They have to clear their calendars and make sure that they've got a really good routine of getting back to people within at least a couple of hours, and making sure that that's really well monitored and handled.
So, I mean, what happens, for example, let's say if you are, a business founder and you've done like a £2 million raise and somebody's put in 5,000 or whatever. I mean, how would you be accountable to those people? Is there a mechanism that you put in place in terms of just weekly reporting, or do you actually need to be personally available? If you have a shareholders meeting, for example, where on Zoom or something like that, where everybody turns up and asks you the questions. I don't really know. What do you think?
So when they're actually raising, so say on a crowdfunding platform, then they have to be available to anyone who wants to ask a question.
Yeah.
Once the investment's been raised, if you've raised investment through a crowdfunding platform, most of them have what's called a nominee structure, which means that if 1,000 people invested in your company, you haven't got to talk to 1,000 people all the time, because you'd spend all your time talking to them and not actually running the business. So the crowdfunding platform acts as the nominee who represents the 1,000 people who've invested. So you communicate with them, and you also upload like monthly or quarterly updates into your area on the platform, and then your investors can see it and download the report and read it, and they can send in questions if they want, and then you can communicate back with them, but it's all done through that kind of nominee structure. Whereas if you take investment from 2 or 3 VCs or 5 or 6 angels, then actually you're expected to have much more personal interaction with them, to have board meetings. They might insist on a board seat as part of their investment terms, and at the very least they will expect shareholder reports on a regular basis.
Yeah. So when you're working with businesses, Julie, that are looking to raise investment, how far do you go in terms of actually advising them on the type of investor that they should be looking for, or the structure of the investment? Do you help them put together business plans, or what does it actually look like? What's the shape of your work with them, or the scope?
Sure. So the shape of our work depends on the stage that the company's at, and also the experience of the founder. So we work quite a bit with very early stage companies, with founders who've never raised investment before, and they've got a good idea and they know how to solve a problem, but they don't have a skill set that includes raising finance. So they come to people like me and say, can you talk me through the process? Can you teach me what investors are expecting? So there's an element for those founders of actually training them on what the process is, how an investor will assess their business, and then working with them to help them put together their pitch deck and their business plan and their financial model, making sure that they've actually got an electronic data room full of the documentation that will be needed for a due diligence exercise, and helping them to make sure that all of that is ready in the right way before they go out and start talking to investors. Whereas companies that are a bit later stage, so that are going for a Series A raise, where typically they've got a good product and they've got revenue, and they're really just kind of at the foot of the big scale up slope, then those companies tend to, they've already raised once or twice, and actually what they come to us for is that they just need some extra pairs of hands to help them pull together what's become a huge amount of data over a very short period of time, and pulling that together into a financial model that makes sense, and a business plan that makes sense, and a pitch deck that easily communicates what's become quite a complex business, becomes a challenge for them. So they're not coming for education about the process necessarily, but sometimes as well they're coming to us saying, we've raised at seed, but it was all kind of, it was with angels and it was done on handshakes, and now we're going to go out and for Series A, we're going to raise from venture capital funds or family offices, and that's a lot more serious, and we're not quite confident at that level. So again, we want a bit of support around what we need to think about, and that will include looking at what is the right route for investment for that company, where are they most likely to succeed, and how do they structure that, what kind of percentage of equity might they think about exchanging in order for the money, to get the level of money that they're looking for. So it's a really detailed, thorough process that we go through to really assess the company, and we have a 6-step proprietary methodology called the Investor Ready Roadmap that we use to assess the businesses, to teach the founders exactly what investors will be looking for, to make sure that no stone goes uncovered.
Yeah, well, it sounds really great. It's because it's so helpful, isn't it, for founders? Because I know that I speak to a lot of small business owners, and I think a lot of them are perhaps torn by the idea of raising finance, because on the one hand, maybe they don't want to let go of control, but on the other hand, they know that they can only scale to a certain level without just bootstrapping the business. In other words, just using their own funds, because that's very hard for people to do, isn't it?
It is. And also, again, it depends on the type of company. Some companies can they just have a slight tweak on a particular model as their business model, and they can organically grow to quite a nice size, but just a bit more slowly. But some companies have come up with something so innovative that they have to get ahead of the market and get market share before other companies figure out how to do it too, because otherwise they'll actually get overtaken. So if they don't raise investment, they actually stand a chance of completely losing any kind of grip on the market at all, because someone that has raised investment will leapfrog over them and take control.
Yeah, I get that. So give me an example, Julie, of a business that you've raised finance for. Why did they raise finance, and what was it for, and what was the impact of them actually raising finance?
Sure. So one that we've worked on recently that's just kind of getting ready to close is a Series A round for a medical devices company. So they make particular devices that help with pain management and muscle healing and that kind of thing. And they are they'd proved an MVP. They'd done lots of research. They've designed multiple different versions of the product that suit different conditions. But now they need to go international on a much bigger scale. They need to carry out full clinical trials, because at the moment they've been using the outputs of other people's research to back up what they've done so far. But now they need their own clinical trials, which are very expensive to run. So they need to fund all of that. Plus, especially when you sell a physical product, if you stir up lots of interest through marketing and then loads of people want to buy it, and you haven't got enough cash to pay for the units to be built before you sell them, then you effectively end up not being able to deliver on the growth that you've generated. So having the extra cash for being able to pay for mass production of units up front ahead of marketing pushes is also really important.
Yeah, I completely get that. And so you mentioned expanding internationally. That's a very good reason, isn't it, to raise capital? And what was the other? What are the other kind of, like, for a Series A round, leapfrogging the competition and actually getting into the marketplace first? What would be other reasons why a Series A round would take place?
So it typically is all about scale. So a Series A round is usually where you've proven your product market fit, and therefore everything is about creating scale. So you're scaling up your marketing, you're scaling up your hiring of people, you're scaling up your technology. Even if you haven't got a technology product, you need a tech stack to run your business. So you'll be scaling up that, you're scaling up your logistics, your supply chain. All of those elements all have to move up in sync, because if one of them gets left behind, then the whole business starts to kind of tilt off axis and it all starts to go a bit wrong. So you've got to have enough capital to move them all at the same speed and as fast as possible to get that market share that is all important.
Yeah. So well, what would you say about the mindset as well of business founders and investors? Because I find this is so important, isn't it? Because a lot of founders, they get scared, don't they? They get scared to approach investors, and even if they have somebody like you who can hold their hand, it's a big deal, isn't it, to bring an investor into your business and actually relinquish some of your control, hand over your targets, be accountable, all of those things. Why do you think, what do you see in terms of the, so should we say, like some of the psychological barriers of some of the business owners that you might work with in that respect?
Yeah, I mean, it can be daunting, and let's be honest, some investor relationships will last longer than some marriages. So you've potentially got them around for quite a long time. So it is super important to make sure that you're taking investment from people that you can actually work with for a long period, particularly if they're people who are expecting to have an active role in oversight of the business and a board seat, that kind of thing. If they're not just silent money, if they're expecting that interaction, then you've got to be really happy that you can work with them. And yes, a lot of founders do find it hard to give up control they'll talk in terms of giving away equity, but they're not giving away equity, they're exchanging it for money that they need to grow their business. And I think it's always important to remember that owning 40% of a £100 million company is much better than owning 100% of a £1 million company. So sometimes you do just have to give up equity in order to enable the growth that actually makes your company worth a huge amount more. But having said that, it's also important not to feel railroaded into having to take investment route. If you just want to create a nice lifestyle business that gives you great holidays and family security, and you can build it to a level that it does that without investment, then don't push yourself beyond that, because the life of an entrepreneur who does push beyond that it's 24/7, and you have to absolutely be driven on that journey to take it to that level. And if you're not, that's a really uncomfortable place to be. So be very sure about really what you want personally from the business, and is it just money? Is it the success of building a super huge company, or is it that you just want to create a nice life for you and your family?
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, because there is a very, very stark difference between people who want a lifestyle business and they just want something that's going to serve their life, and people who, people say they call it empire building, but it's not necessarily that. It's just to do with sort of being all in, and as you said, the 24/7 mentality. And I think that's not just, some people say, well, that's just about kind of, the harder hustle and working 90 hours a week. And I don't think it is that. I think it really is an attitudinal thing, just about being all in and having priorities and really putting your business ahead of some other things for the time that it takes in order for you to achieve your goals. And personally, I think, I don't raise investment for small businesses like you, but I think I do advise a lot of business owners. And I think the thing that I would say to them is, look, unless you're prepared to go all in and actually really prioritize your growth, don't raise investment, because that is what it takes. Once you bring somebody else's money into the agenda, then you have to serve it. You have to serve them, and you have to prioritize them, and you have to prioritize them, and respect their money. And even if you're having a bad day, you're having an off day, your wife has said, can you pick the kids up from here or from there? Yes, you have to juggle, but at the same time, you have to take that responsibility of somebody else's money really seriously, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that one of the other areas that we work with startups on is that post-investment piece, when investors start saying, well, how is this company governed? What is your corporate governance? And many founders have never done corporate governance in their life and wouldn't have a clue of, well, what's supposed to be in a board pack and what data should come through to the board, and and how do we look after the risks in the business and things like that. And once you've taken that investment, those investors absolutely want to know that you are governing the business correctly. So taking investment doesn't just mean that you get money, it means you get additional responsibilities, additional drains on your time, because now you've got governance to look after, you've got investors to look after, all those things that you have to take account of when you're thinking about whether you want to raise.
Yeah, definitely. And as I said, I know people that they've scaled businesses without external investment and they've done very well. And I know people who've grown businesses very fast with investment and they've done very well. And I've also spoken to people who've taken investment and they failed, and their investors' money has gone down with it. So I've been exposed to all of those things. And I guess the only thing that, I can say is that, it is a journey, but whenever you introduce any partners into your business, whether they are silent partners or whether they are actually actively involved, and of course, that's something that we can also talk about. You are really, it's a little bit like a marriage. You are taking on a major commitment to another human being. And if you are not ready to do that, if you don't have the maturity or the willingness to understand the seriousness of that, then stay away. That's my thinking. I don't know if you agree with that, Julie.
Yeah, definitely. You've got to be at least willing to work at an investor relationship. I'm not sure any first-time founders who've never raised before are ever completely ready to suddenly have investors, because it's something they've never experienced before, and it is a completely different relationship than they'll have ever had in anything they've done before in their working lives, most likely. So you can't kind of be 100% ready for something that you've never experienced before, but at least if they understand what the implications are, then they're better prepared going into it.
Yeah. So just to go back to this thing of like silent investors versus active investors, that's quite a big decision, really, isn't it? Because there are some investors who they will want to be active partners in the business, or they will want to take decisions. And then there are others who will want to just hand over all the decision making and just basically trust that things are being done in the right way and that the reporting structures are in place. So if you were advising a business on whether to take an active or a hands-free investor, what would you say to them, Julie?
Well, what you need when you're preparing to go out and raise investment, one of the key things you need to do is do an analysis of the business, of the skills and experience that you need to make the business a success. Compare that to the skills and experience you've got, and then the gaps are where you try and find what's called smart investment, which is investment plus expertise. And so you hopefully get an investor with the expertise that fills the gap that you're looking for. If you get, if you've already got an amazing CTO or an amazing CMO, and someone comes along and says, I'm brilliant at marketing, well, do you really need that? And are they therefore the right investor? Because you could potentially end up with them saying one thing and your CMO saying something else, and it all starts to get very tricky. So the more that you can be aware of the gaps that you've got and try and actively fill those with the right kinds of investors, the better. And also, be quite targeted in how you intend to structure your round. So, potentially you've got 2 board seats available, and therefore investors who invest over 20% of the total round, and they are the ones that come with extra expertise. And then you want the rest of the investors to be silent investment, that they just hand over their money and then sit back and wait for the shareholder reports.
Yeah.
So again, you can start to really build up a picture of what you want that structure to look like.
Yeah. Well, Julie, I have to say it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you tonight. What an amazing conversation, and thank you so much for joining us. How would people get in touch with you, Julie, if they wanted to talk to you about either raising finance or becoming investors? What's the best way to get in touch with you?
Sure. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Julie A. Barber, or you can go to our website, which is www.spark-consulting.co.uk. Or if you want to do some reading around the subject, then you can go to Amazon and pick up my book, which is Investor Ready, the Startup's Guide to Getting Investors to Say Yes.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for all your wisdom and experience, and for sharing all of that with our audience this evening, and for our podcast audience, because we'll be repurposing this and going global. So thank you, Julie. It's been great to have you here, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Lovely. Thank you.